This is Dave Meltzer with Entrepreneurs, the Playbook, and I have a special guest, Adam Archuleta. He is today a CBS analyst, but previously an NFL star, played here in Arizona, safety, a former linebacker turned safety, is that right?
Former college linebacker, turned safety in the NFL.
That's an amazing thing. Well, we know you had a great football career, but this is really about what it takes in life to, number one, make it to the most competitive sport in the most competitive league, and how that carries over into real life and how we can inspire. Because I think there's so many parallels between being an entrepreneur and being a football player.
Yeah.
I know I read you wanted to be a professional football player when you were little.
Yes.
And it's not easy. I wanted to be one too, but it's very rare. Like, a kid dreams about being a fireman and he's a fireman.
Yeah.
I had a brother, 5 years old, wanted to be a doctor. He became a doctor. What do you think it was that, number one, compelled you to want to be a professional football player at a young age, and then two, actually be able to execute on that?
Well, I don't know exactly what it is, because I think as young kids, you say you want to be a lot of things, right? But then do you actually follow that path? Is it realistic to follow down that path? For me,
I take that personally. Yeah. Thank you. Right,
but
not so realistic.
I think for me, for whatever it was, I just remember it was the first time I had seen a football game. It was a Denver Bronco game. I was sitting on the couch with my dad, and I just said, "Dad, I'm going to do that one day." And just for some reason, that thought just stuck, it just burrowed deep into my brain. And from that day forward, I just believed that I was going to be in the NFL. Now, I wasn't big enough, fast enough, or strong enough, or good enough, but in my mind, I was always going to be a football player. I just had to figure out how I was going to do it. And it never stuck with me. It was just like an idea that just festered, and that just became my reality.
And because you weren't big enough, strong enough, fast enough at the time, and there's such a small percentage chance, I always worry that parents, and I'm a parent of 4, you're a parent of 3, that we actually, close off the imagination and dreams by raining on parades. When I think of Muggsy Bogues, how many people must have told him, looking at his parents, when he said, like you're a first round draft pick, I think 20th pick, if I remember from when I was an agent.
Yeah, there you go.
But Muggsy was a 12th pick at the NBA draft at 5'4".
Which is crazy, right?
But how many people in his life told him, "Look, Muggsy, there's no way this is happening. I'm just telling you to protect you." Was your father in support? Or how many people in your lifetime kept on saying, "Hey, change your dreams"?
Well, first of all, I want to go back to something
please.
that you said.
Yeah.
I think the imagination and the creativity. And I think that, to me, is the common denominator, whether it's sports or whether it's business or being an agent or whatever it is. If you want to actually break through to the highest level, I think it's the creativity, that's the driver of it, and using your imagination. I think, it's interesting, I was talking to a friend of mine, Todd Heap, who was a tight end at ASU and was a first-round pick and played for Baltimore all those years. And I just saw him this summer, and we were kind of talking about the same thing. And he was working with some young high school kids, and he said the number one thing that he talked about playing tight end is how to use your imagination, how to use your creativity. And that's really what it's all about. I think success comes with creativity. It's the people who see things differently than everybody else. And when that light bulb turns on, then all of a sudden great stuff starts to happen. So I think that to me is the key. And I do think we stifle the instincts, and I think we stifle the creativity of kids because we think we're coaching them. Yeah. But we got to allow them to be who they want to be, and that can only come from them.
Yeah, if we're teaching only what we know, then they can only become copies of us.
Right.
I would say, let an imagination clothe itself. Really cool things happen.
Yeah.
I come also from a technology background, and one of the things that I'm fearful of is that technology has advanced so far that I see a lot of young people that the technology has surpassed what their imaginations. And I would almost prefer my kid to read science fiction to keep the mind moving so that technology can support these dreams of things that you and I, if you look back when you were 5, the things that exist today, somebody dreamed of them.
Absolutely,
they were, some of them I didn't think were possible.
Absolutely. And so, or, let your kids sit in their room for a few hours a day with nothing, right? Where all they have is their mind. I just remember when I was young, I would visit my dad in Wyoming. And so he would work during the day, and I would spend the night so I could stay at my grandma's house. And so it was just like me and a mountain in Wyoming and like a clothesline and some fences, and that's all I did all day. It was just me. And so I think there was a lot of time to dream and use your imagination. And I'm not saying that's the reason why I was able to do things, but I do think some great things happen when it's just you and your thoughts.
Yeah, and then I played defensive back in college, Division III, so I know I was like caveat that for where we're at. But one of the things that I learned to do as a defensive back was react. And the interesting thing with my perspective in life is that every day when you wake up, you only get one action, because everything after that is a reaction.
Sure.
So practice is truly the consistent behavior that drives us when we do stuff, and all the things you do consistently. We learn as defensive backs, and you played a lot longer than me, but I learned to react correctly, to be able to go back to center. Especially as a defensive back, you have to have a short memory. You can't dwell. You got to keep on playing. All of these little strategies that we've learned. What to you was the key in learning how to react correctly, and still do you carry through that in life today?
Well, to me, I think what you're saying is how to rely on your instincts, because when you overanalyze anything, you can't work at speed, and you can't actually learn anything because you're sitting there and you're spending too much time analyzing. And so to me, it was, how do you develop your instincts, and how do you develop the skill to trust your instincts and be able to just go, right? I think back to when I played at the highest level. Everything was just a reaction. Everything, you just feel it. Everything was instinctual. And then when you're not, or you're playing at a low level, you're overthinking stuff. And then you give yourself time to question things. I can remember the turning point for me was in college. I backed up Pat Tillman as a freshman. He left. And then as a sophomore, I became the starter. And in my mind, I thought, okay, I'm pretty good. I'm the starter, and I wasn't playing that well. And I remember the last game of the season, I got benched. It was against U of A, and Trunk Candidate ran for like 291 yards against us. So I got benched at halftime. And then you kind of see the writing on the wall in the offseason, and you start to see you're not included as much, and you're in danger of slipping. And I thought, oh my goodness, I'm in danger of losing a spot, right? And so I remember I watched so much tape and analyzed my play. And I just kind of came up with this idea of always stripping things to their common denominator, always trying to find the simplest thing to work on. And so that if you work with the theory of, if you work on that and you get good at that, that speeds up everything else. And so to me, I started to watch so much tape of why I made the play, why I didn't make the play. And it came down to one thing. It was, I wasn't trusting my instinct. So when I made the play, I hit it. When I didn't, I hesitated. And so I came up with a system of teaching myself how to read plays so that after one step, I just made a decision and I went as fast as I could. And I said, when spring ball came, I was third on the depth chart. So my instinct was right. They had moved on from me. But I said, I'm going to stick to my plan. I'm going to make one step and I'm just going to go. And I'm going to trust it. And the funny thing happened was I was right 9 times out of 10. And so then it wasn't a guess. It was now all of a sudden I forced myself to work at such a high speed. My body got used to making decisions at that fast speed. And then that got ingrained. And then I could trust myself. And then all of a sudden the light bulb goes off, right? So it's forcing yourself to make decisions at speed and then trusting it.
And 2 things stick out there to me. One, my business partner is a Hall of Fame quarterback who they basically forced to play in Canada for 6 years, right? As an African-American quarterback. And he always tells me, as difficult as it was to win 5 Grey Cups and to sit up in Edmonton when I knew I was good enough to play, I wasn't going to be the greatest player like I was of all time, which still can be argued he was, but at his time he held every record, and he was the first African-American in the Hall of Fame.
Too. I mean,
you could intercept it easy too, but it was really nice. But it was interesting because I never thought of it. He said, but for them doing that, I don't think I would have played 17 years. I never, and it sounds like to me when you're describing it, if you didn't have that last game of the season where they ran all over you, that you may have just taken that ego-based consciousness and say, everything's fine.
Everything's fine.
And yet, I believe from what you described to me that was the subtlety of success that made you good enough to make the NFL, to be a first round pick, that you rose in the charts all of a sudden. You started the junior year, I know, and highly touted your senior year.
Yeah.
I do know that from my side and perspective of everybody wanting you. Through that though, was there any other time when you went to the NFL that you felt, that same pressure, that wow, another reality check for you, we have to step it up?
I think the beauty of the NFL and what I love about pro sports is the pressure. And I think if you can, it's one of the few places that in life that you can't hide. And so it doesn't matter how you feel. It doesn't matter if you're hurt. It doesn't matter if you're sensitive. It doesn't matter if you just got beat. It doesn't matter if your feelings hurt. It doesn't matter if your wife is mad at you. It doesn't even matter if you just made the greatest play on earth. The next play, you've got to line up and do it all again, right? And so there's no excuses. Everybody on the other team are using all of their resources to expose your weaknesses. And nothing matters. So you learn really quickly, like, hey, it doesn't matter how I feel about myself. I've got to get myself ready to play the next play. And so I think when you're able to not dwell on your successes and not dwell on your failures, and you're worried about what do I have to do now and be in the present, I think that's when you can ultimately be successful. And I think anytime we dwell on the past or the future, then we can't be as good as we want to be. So I love the NFL because there's no place to hide.
What about fear? A lot of people deal with fear, and I want you to talk about fear when you played, but probably a greater fear, now that you're not playing, the fear of life, being married, have kids, all the different things. What was your greatest fear when you were playing?
That's a deep question, and if you want, you could pull out your couch and charge me by the hour. I mean,
I'm a huge executive coach, man. I'm here for you.
We can get pretty deep, and I might get emotional here. No, I think I experienced so many things as a player. I experienced being a high first-round pick. I experienced being a starter on one of the greatest teams in the league. I experienced being a high-priced free agent. I've experienced getting benched, and I've experienced having to make the team in the last preseason game. So, I know every single emotion of what it is to be a player in the NFL. I don't think a lot of guys have that experience. To me, the biggest fear, and I think it was the biggest detriment, because I don't think this is the way to live, but once you get there, it is the fear of failing. And I don't think if you have that fear, you can't play at your best. If you're worried about failing, if you're worried about all the things you can't control, if you're worried about your coach or the media or looking bad on television, you can't be at your best, And so I think that to me was a big lesson that I learned, because as high as I went, I also had just a catastrophic failure when 2 years after I went to the Washington Redskins. So, that was a big blow to my ego. That was a big blow to my identity. And I think a lot of that was because I got to a place where I stopped worrying about the things that were important, and I let so many outside influences dictate what I thought about.
Interesting. How about in real life? I say after playing, a lot of people don't understand. You do experience 2 deaths as a football player when you stop playing, and then hopefully a long time from now the next one. But there's a lot of fear. I coach a lot of football players, especially in the transitional stage of getting into podcast or entrepreneurial work or whatever. And I see there's more fear because they don't have the confidence that they had on the field. What was your greatest fear, or is off the field?
I got to be honest. So I think you hit it right on the head. I think so. For me, I ended up getting into television, which is funny because anybody who knew me, I probably had a legitimate. It wasn't diagnosed, but I had a legitimate social phobia and social anxiety.
Really? Total introvert.
Massive introvert. Never felt comfortable around people. This is well into my 20s, even when I played in the NFL. Now, being in the NFL gave me confidence, and I was able to kind of fake it.
You should have been a running back. Most running backs have agoraphobia, right?
Yeah.
I know a lot of it.
I could do my interviews with my helmet on, like Ricky Williams,
Ricky.
I didn't go
He
that
was my
far.
client, by the way.
I didn't go that far.
And went to my high school, so you're hitting me really close. That's perfect.
He's a great guy, though. But that was
Awesome guy.
hilarious.
Yeah.
But so for me, I just remember always being so uncomfortable in social situations, and I just remember telling myself, "Look, you're not going to live like this. Like this isn't cool. Like you can't do this." And so I just forced myself just to be more social and put myself in uncomfortable situations, and then I decided to get into television, which was, like I said, a pretty strange choice considering where I was. And so I would say that was my greatest fear, was just social interaction and being in social situations and being in front of a camera. And so I decided that I was going to attack it, and being on television was one of those ways.
Yeah, awesome. And now, takeaways from that journey. I always say life's about lessons, and I really like to share the lessons. What's the number one lesson so far in your journey that you've learned that you would pass on to your 3 kids right now if they said, hey man, you got to teach your kids one thing? What would it be?
One thing, I would say, if I can sum it up in one phrase, no matter where you're at in life, is don't be afraid to be a rookie again. Right? And so I think a lot of guys that have played sports, who have gotten to a high level, it's easy to work hard when you're doing something you love or something that you're good at. It really is. I mean, it's still hard work compared to everything else, but it's really easy to just put your heart and soul into it and endure things that nobody else would. But when that's over, and you've had all the accolades, and you've put in 15, 20, 25 years of just grinding in your heart and soul, and now you have to do it all over again, that can be intimidating. And I think that can be a big blow to people's ego when you're not making that much money, or you're not good at it, and then you have to start the grind all over again. And you're like, oh my God, like I'm used to being the best in the world. Like I've got to do this now. And so I think, being able to put yourself out there, to be vulnerable, and not get caught up in, be willing to start all over again from scratch and just give it everything you have.
It's interesting you say that, because today I usually post something, and today I said, my prayer for the day is I don't know. Yeah. And somebody asked me, well, what does that mean? So if you're listening to this podcast, watching the podcast, that's exactly what it means. I wanted radical humility in my life. I lost everything in my 30s. Over $100 million. I learned what that was like. And I tell people all the time, like, oh, I appreciate your vulnerability. And I said, look, what I've learned is to be completely vulnerable makes me invulnerable. Yeah, and it's a complete dichotomy of what we do. And the lessons, I love your journey. I love the story and the lessons that you taught. I really think a lot of people should re-listen to this, especially about fear, and most especially about the radical humility that you've had and the challenges that you faced. And I really appreciate you taking the time. It's been incredible.
Yeah, love it. Love awesome. Talking about this kind of stuff. Yeah.
Good, we'll do it again.
All right.
This is Adam Archuleta with Dave Meltzer, Entrepreneurs, The Playbook.